mention a bunch of other books, but I know what they are.
Yay! We're
All right.
recording.
All right.
Hey,
Good
it's
morning.
Friday. Welcome to episode 2 of Founder Loveline. This is the event series that's modeled off of Dr. Drew's radio show that we all love, Loveline. And this series will be your founder hotline, asking all of your burning questions, featuring tech leaders who have been in your shoes and really get it. So we really started this series to make space for humanizing the entrepreneurship journey and creating a community of founders that can build side by side with proactive tools, frameworks, and share tactical knowledge. Tony, we are so happy to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining. Appreciate it. So Tony is here, and he's an incredible leader that I recently met in Phoenix. He is a product expert and the founder of Extreme Automation, which is focused on decade over decade automation for medium and large shops. And Tony loves everything a little agile, is dedicated to promoting it as a great way of working. So welcome, Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Daniela. So, yes, I love everything little a agile, and part of this whole thing is I worked at a shop that really taught us to ask very good questions. And they have a model for it. It's very easy to learn the model. So when you asked about good questions, I'm like, boy, oh boy, let's go. So, that's my. I like that end of the universe. You talked about let's build an ecosystem. That's what you're doing, and I want to contribute models to that ecosystem because I think we can leapfrog what we've seen in Silicon Valley. I was there for a long time, and I think we could just use better models and move ourselves along. And so, thanks for having me on. I love talking about this stuff.
No, absolutely. We're so looking forward to it. I think many of us sitting in the entrepreneurial solopreneur route, right? Like we could always get better at asking questions to ourselves and to the world and others around us. So I think it's really interesting to kind of break down and dissect how we can calibrate our own judgment around asking questions. So diving into some of the models on the fair and unfair and outrageous and things that we talked about in our early discussions. So let's jump in.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there are going to be three things. So one of the keys to asking good questions is just have a good plan. And so there's going to be three things here. It's calibrating our own intuition. It's using a standard model because when you ask good questions, you're asking it of someone. And I think the most effective group to ask questions to is around a dozen people or less, because you can use this model to get a deep understanding of what they're after. So it is calibrating your own moral intuition. It is using this quick model called a 2x2 and a dump and sort. We'll define all of that. And then the last thing is you ask these kind of filtering questions about context, capability, and consequence, and we'll go through every bit of that. But that's the three parts of this. Is that clear enough to start?
Beautiful. I love it. And I think many of us as leaders wanting to ensure that we are cultivating this deep level around humility and limits of our understanding, in this ever-evolving tech landscape, how can we ensure that we're calibrating our moral intuitions when it comes to how we frame these questions?
Yeah, and so I am going to start with a quote from a famous person because this is much easier to start with. So I have a point of view that we need to do our own internal work before we can be good at this. And so we're just going to take a quote from Maya Angelou about courage, because if you don't do this without courage, it doesn't matter. So here we go with Maya Angelou. Courage is the most important of all the virtues because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. You can practice any virtue erratically, but nothing consistently without courage. And that's how we at first anchor our own moral intuition. If we ask our questions weakly and accept weak answers from ourselves, we are going to get weak answers. And we're not going to be able to be consistent. So this model is meant for a loop. It is taught to people. This is just like, hey, here's how we go engage with a client. And so for me, I have to learn how to listen to questions because I have my own moral intuition. And I think we've played this game, but we'll just do it. If I say, hey, let's each put in $1 and buy a donut, and then because there's only two of us, we're gonna use this, what's called a game theory fair way to split it. And it's called I cut, you decide. And so we take a knife and one person cuts and the other person chooses what side of the donut they want. And this is a game theory fair game because both interests are aligned no matter which side of the knife you're on. If I get the knife and I cut it 2/3, 1/3, then you still get to choose the 2/3 size of the donut. Like, it's very difficult for me to cheat you. And so you want to become very clear on these game theory fair games. What's that like? Then there are unfair games. Here's an unfair game. See if you can tease it out. Heads I win, tails you lose. Would you play that game with me? Danielle, am I still on with you? So you go through it as heads I win, tails you lose. And you say to yourself, well, heads, they win, tails, I lose. So I don't think there's a way for me to win this game. And so its rules are different based on who proposes the rules and gets the agreement. In a heads I win, tails you lose game, someone proposes bad rules. And if you don't catch that, you're stuck with it. And if you don't think that people are offering you that kind of game, you should look deeply at all these kind of things. Heads I win, tails you lose is not a fair game. And so then we go on to outrageous games. There's a game that I describe like this. You had a great day, something great happened in your family, something great happened at work also. Like, it was a great day. You're like, I'm having ice cream tonight. You go out to your favorite ice cream shop, you get your favorite ice cream, you love standing on the street corner, watching the world go by, eat your ice cream. And everyone who's walking by, they can tell you've had a great day. You're just glowing. It's a great day. You've got your ice cream, and out of the corner of your eye, you catch this outrageously dressed rollerblader. And that person looks right at you, and they can clearly see that you had a good day. But they are not exactly sharing that sense of goodness with you. They've actually got something else in their eye. And as they skate by, looking right in your eyes, they knock your ice cream out of your hand just to see the look on your face that someone would do that so consciously. That's what that person gets out of the emotional transaction. And that's an outrageous game. And that person is a sadist. We talk about the dark tetrad. Sadism, Machiavellianism, narcissism, all of these very bad traits. And people will act out of those. And you need your own intuition because you're going into a place to ask good questions. And if you're not ready to hear outrageous propositions, you will not be effective in that room. Okay, so that's the fair, unfair, outrageous. Does all of that make sense?
Yeah, no, that resonates, and I love that last piece, right? It's like, if you're not ready to hear the most outrageous, like, you're not.
We're having a little bit of audio issue, so I'm assuming that works out okay. And so the next thing we do is we're going to go into a room with a bunch of people who we want to ask good questions to. And so we're going to use a model called a 2x2. And Jason and Janice Frazier at Pivotal, where I used to work, they have a book out on it called Further, Faster, and Far Less Drama. Right? It covers many of these models. Right? This is what that set of designers taught me at this company. And it's in a book, and you can just go look it up. And so the most simple thing you can do is a 2x2. And at the top, you write doable, and at the far right side, you write desirable, because you want all of the doable, desirable ideas to cluster at the top right corner. And the things that are doable but not desirable, you want them far out of the way. And so then here's the hardest part about this. You have to tell everyone, I'm going to give you sticky notes and Sharpie,
Absolutely.
And I want you to write one idea per sticky note. One idea per sticky note. If you can land just writing one idea per sticky note, you will be a master facilitator. So you say, hey, look, I want you to write one idea per sticky note. I'm going to let you write, and I want you to ideate what is desirable and what is doable in our context. If we're trying to make a new application for people who work on an airline, baggage loading ramp, like, that would be our context. What's desirable and what's doable in the airline baggage loading. And then you have people write, and then at the end of 5 minutes, you've got all these people with all these sticky notes, and then you drop the kind of hammer on them. You're like, okay, take your top 3 ideas and pass them in. And you'll get a real groan, right? People are very attached to their good ideas. And so you can turn to the room and you can say, look, I know what that groan is about. You've got a lot of good ideas. What if one of your good ideas was everyone else's good idea too, and we could do it? That's the real kicker of the asking good questions model here, right? It's not simply that my good idea, I get to in the room quietly, I don't have to tell anyone what I'm doing. It's not a matter of the loudest or the highest paid or anything.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of what I think would be the best ideas. And then those top 3 get passed in from the, maybe up to a dozen people who are in the room. And as the facilitator, you just bundle them into groups. Hey, doable and desirable in this ramp app would be, photo tracking of baggage, right? It just automatically takes pictures of baggage and can tell the difference between everything. And we don't even need a barcode for it because it can just be read right off the baggage. Someone could say that. And a dozen people could say that, like, yeah, that would make our lives a lot better because we'd spend a lot of time dragging baggage in front of a camera, and that doesn't make any sense, blah, blah, blah. And so there'll be other things like, oh, whatever, the coffee is not good. There'll be just totally random things. Like, okay, well, coffee is not in our purview, and so it ends up not in the top right quadrant. As you go through this, you can turn to the room and say, hey, you've got a suggestion here and a suggestion here. Are these really the same thing? That's another key part of asking these good questions. How many people are saying the same thing with different words? Because that's another of the major things you do if you want to bring a team into alignment. What if the words we are using are actually the same? Because again, if you end up with the same idea phrased differently, and you will, in the top right quadrant, now, how hard is the political job to sell everyone in the room that we should do that thing? And for them, it's a no-brainer. And so this is the trap. Don't use just the first 2 steps. You can go into any room and come to an agreement on something desirable and doable, no problem. You'll find that it's a very easy thing to do. The problem is you have to apply this final filter. Of course this is a good idea. If you ask this in an open question with no boundaries, you're like, hey, what would, if you just, and I did this at product schools, like, with no boundaries, what's desirable and doable? And you get solve world hunger, solve world education, like solve world level problems. That's great. That is totally desirable. In our 30 minutes together, it's probably not doable. Mm-hmm. So you can come to really strong agreement on something that's desirable and doable. And then you have to ask these next 3 questions. I call them the 3 C's. Who has the context? Who knows what a baggage handling system should really look like? Like, does anyone in this room actually ever use one? Because if we never use one, we don't have the context to say whether this desirable thing is doable. We really don't have that context. And then we ask the next thing, like, even if we could describe how to make a mango smoothie, do we have the capability? Do we have a blender here? Or is there any mangoes on site? Can I get some coconut milk, right? It doesn't matter whether a mango smoothie is a really good idea if you don't have the capability to build it. And then, of course, in the world that we live in, someone has to say yes to this thing. Someone has to say yes. Who has the consequence of this thing? And I think of this in the crudest terms. This is not how I think about how to run the world, but I think of that question in the most crude terms as who gets champagne and who gets fired. Like when I ask that consequence question, I want to pretty deeply wrap myself around what the real deal here is. Who gets champagne or who gets fired if this works or doesn't work? And so that's it. That is the entire basic model of how to ask good questions in the room.
I love it, Tony. Yeah, it's such a different mindset, I think, going from the surface level, great idea on paper, to a much deeper aspect of how you can evaluate truly good questions. And I think, we can read all the books, we can do those things, but I think being part of that change and being a leader and an individual who actually practices problem solving in that way would be really impactful. So it's great to hear that these frameworks exist. I personally have not been exposed to leaders who have broken down the 3 C's in the way that you have. So I think this is an interesting opportunity to integrate it into our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, my vision here is that here in the Phoenix software ecosystem, we can just skip to using the known best models. It's essentially like we got to, in 1910, we got to go see the Henry Ford plant and how they built cars. And then we came back to Arizona. We're like, okay, well, this guy has this assembly line thing, which no one else has and no one has discovered. And so let's copy him. In the same way, I went to Silicon Valley and I worked there for 20 years, up and down the peninsula. My job is like a gaffer. Like, if you think about the movie industry, my job is a gaffer. I went around and I plugged stuff in and I taped it down and I made sure you could walk around on set without tripping. I mean, really, you want to think of my contribution there as, essentially a contract gaffer, but instead of, movie equipment, it was compute equipment. Mm-hmm. And okay, so I learned a lot about that. So we can leapfrog over many processes that don't work because I have seen a pile of stuff that does not work. And I've run across a model that, if we could make it the standard in the Phoenix tech ecosystem, if 80% of software startups use models like this, we would first of all be this incredible laboratory for software production models. Not just software production, but the forming of a whole company designed for software production.
I love that. I love that vision. And when you look at even the client side aspect of it, so it's like we can use this model as internal tools on our teams, but when you look at the client side of understanding sentiment and the customer journey, right? I mean, that just puts a user experience on a completely different level using
you've
that
got
level,
it exactly right.
those,
I mean,
those framework
software
models in the product development process.
Yeah. Yeah, and the product development process is going to go wildly wild now because you can just as a general practice, you can go describe stuff to ChatGPT 4 and have it be an app, and then you can go query your own app. Like, hey, does this thing help me? And you can do iterations on helpful interactive apps alone, essentially, and you can run variants of them by having the machine help generate it. And so you're going to have a model that allows you to ask good questions either of people or of machines.
Yeah, yeah, we're
this
there, right?
This
That's the world we're
recognition.
living in.
Yeah, we're that. Yeah, I'm not. Thank goodness. Like, for most of my life, I have sounded like a crazy person. Like, hey, these machines are going to get to this point of view, and they're going to be able to do all of this stuff, and spin off tasks and organize things for you, and take a 4-hour task and make it a 45-minute task. Like, I'm literally, I can't believe what I'm seeing, but here we are, and this thing is like it is, and so
yeah, and I think that's such an opportunity
yeah.
for us as individuals, and as we're doing our solo work. How can we level up our consciousness into the way that we approach some of these problems? One of the questions that we actually got was around, individual perspectives and influence on like your tech intuition about decision-making processes. It's like many of us are in these, individual contributor type roles, but how do we ensure that our intuition, when it is related to the influence that we want to have on technology, how can we ensure that perspective kind of fits those frameworks that are getting us to the deeper level perspectives of the question asking to ensure that we're solving for the right things?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is, we would say, do the right thing right. It wasn't just do the thing right. It was do the right thing right. And so, look, I'll short circuit the whole thing. You could listen to me talk, or there are 2 or 3 books that are just really the foundation of this. So if you're an individual contributor, I'm going to recommend directly a book called Turn the Ship Around by David Marquet. I have a podcast with him. I'll give you the reference to that on the Radio Free XP podcast. It's called Nudge 61 with David Marquet. And in the first 3 or 4 minutes, he describes what the fundamental problem is. And his fundamental answer is, hey, you have to move from a leader-follower model He built his model in the U.S. Navy as a U.S. Navy submarine captain. So he knows leader-follower like crazy. And he's like, leader-follower doesn't work. And he says very specifically why. Is because it leaves, a third to two-thirds of the IQ of the people on your team on the table. If you make them follow, they stop thinking. And so he suggests you have to use this leader-leader model. So if you're an individual contributor, I suggest highly this book, because the leader-leader model is everyone up and down the chain. If you go to his second book, he embraces a somewhat radical premise for the way the world looks right now, which is there's no such thing as a difference between thinking and doing work. And the industrial age model has a big difference between thinking and doing work, and it doesn't make sense anymore. Okay, sorry, that's a long run out on like, what do you do if you're an IC, or what do you do if you want to have a bigger impact? And learn leader. If you want to have a real impact and you have no power, no nothing right now, learn the leader model, which is a language-based model. And happy to talk about that forever.
Love it. Thanks for sharing that one. Amazing, Tony. The fair, unfair, outrageous, calibrating your own judgment using the 2x2s and the PostITs to crowdsource. Really, really powerful. And then the reality check with the 3 C's. So context, capability, consequence. Thank you so much for sharing this wisdom. Appreciate you being on and for your time and your impact that you're making in the community. And we look forward to chatting more.
All right, Daniela, thank you very much.
All right, we'll see everyone on the 17th. We're going to have Vlad on from Miami talking about the fundraising process and founder empowerment. So November 17th, Luma Link. We'll see you there.